Hey, what is up, everyone? With Season 16 being focused on the Reaper's Bones coming out on May 22nd, so just around the corner, I thought now would be a good time to talk about what I would like to see in my perfect Reaper season. Now, obviously, there's probably going to be ideas that y'all have that would also be good for a Reaper season, and this video is not meant to encompass every single idea that could be ever tied to the Reaper's Bones, but just kind of what I think would be good as a good packaged Reaper's Bones focused season. So the Reaper's Bones is definitely a unique faction in the game where it's mostly PvP focused, which makes it very distinct from all the other factions that we have in the game that are more PvE focused. But there's tons that we can still do with it that is somewhat PvE adjacent, as well as being, PvP focused and core to what the Reaper's Bones is. So to start off on my perfect Reaper season, I think this is just an easy win in my book, is bring back the gunpowder rowboats. So if you remember, I believe it was the Lost Sands adventure that had these rowboats that with a keg attached to the back of it. Nothing too fancy, it was more of like an armored gunpowder barrel, so I think it took like 2 shots to make it explode, or maybe you had to manually explode it. I don't remember exactly how it worked, but I remember it being like an armored gunpowder keg. So it was not like just carrying a regular gunpowder keg on like a normal rowboat, it was a little bit more than that. I thought these were a really fun addition, and they were really fun for the limited time that they were in the game. And I think for a Reaper season, even if it was just for the season and maybe it went away after the season, it would be great to have these return just to have some fun and goof around with. Next, and this one might be a little controversial, I talked about it in a video a while back, but this would be to allow other ways to progress the Servant of Flame. So the Servant of Flame and Reaper's Bones are heavily connected to each other, and the annoying thing with the Servant of Flame is that since the only way to progress it is by doing the Hourglass mode and going into the PvP fights for that, it has no real connection to what you do as a Reaper's Bones. So as someone that prefers to do PvP through like tucking and just kind of the normal way that it's been for years prior to Hourglass being introduced, it feels like there's a bunch of Reaper content that I'm locked away from because I don't want to play as the Reaper's Bones in that specific way. So what I would like to see is basically just open it up to have other Reaper activities be able to progress the Servant of Flame, and how they would make that work would be up to them really. But I really just want the ability for, the PvP stuff that I do that's just natural in the game, whether it's, stealing emissary flags and selling them and that kind of stuff. I want that to also contribute so that we can access stuff like the Reaper's Bones lair that's underneath the island, or stuff like the skeleton curses. Those are 2 big things that any Reaper's Bones fan would love to have if they're not also a fan of Hourglass mode. And even if you're a fan of Hourglass, you probably realize that it's a pretty grindy activity where if you want to progress the Servant of Flame, you have to play a ton of Hourglass. And with all the problems that that mode has had over the years, I think it's time to just give people an alternative. Those that enjoy playing it, they can keep playing it, but those that don't want to play it, they can do something else. I also think it would help with the lost farming that is definitely an issue with Hourglass, that a lot of people just hop into there and they'll like circle around the area just trying to avoid it and try to tire out the other person to get the other person to quit so that they can get an easy win, or they'll just go in and immediately let themselves like die and sink so that they can just get a few points for the Servant of Flame faction. Both of these aren't great, and the core reason it's happening is because the Hourglass mode is the only way to access these really cool things in the game. So I'm sure there's going to be some people that don't like that idea, but I think that would be a big thing and would make sense to make that change within the Reaper's Bones season. Now let's dive into more of the interesting part of this video. The last 2 were kind of stuff that's been in the past and kind of just updating some stuff or bringing some stuff back. This is getting into more of the newer stuff. So first, let's talk about dedicated activities for the Reaper's Bones. This can be pretty hard to do just with the nature of the Reaper's Bones. At its core, it should stay a PvP-focused faction and not become a PvE-focused faction. With that said, we could see additions of long-wanted features such as a bounty system or like a bounty voyage. I talked about this in the past, but it could potentially be something that allows you to hunt down other players, and maybe it selects like the highest target player based on certain criteria. I would really love to see at Reaper's Hideout a bounty board that is similar to the buried treasure quest boards that we currently have in the game, and this would allow you to kind of go up to them and basically be able to choose like different pirates that you see on the board and like kind of maybe take their flyer down or whatever, and then it would maybe start the voyage or something like that. And I think that would be pretty cool. And we could have the targeted players be based off certain criteria so that it's not just going after, some newbie that's, has like one castaway chest and, it's just minding their own business, fishing or whatever. Try to avoid those people, and I think the bounty system could focus on stuff like who has the highest kill count for that server at that time, or it could be who is holding the most treasure in the game currently. So like someone that's like stacking loot and they already know that they're going to be in danger. This would be something that's kind of like, now you got to be careful if you start stacking loot because you could potentially be targeted by this bounty board. It could even pick players that like are just old players in the game. So someone that's like a veteran player like myself might get targeted before, say, like a new player. And I think that would work too. Basically, what you want is you don't want the bounty to pick someone randomly just because then you might get in a boring fight. Not everyone wants to fight. I think you want to go for people that are likely going to be skilled players, so it would be an interesting fight. So, like, highest kill count makes sense, veteran players make sense. But then also, you want to kind of have a reward from it. So, someone that's holding a lot of treasure on their ship that's like loot stacking, it would make sense for the bounty system to target those people too. I think there's a lot of potential with the bounty system, so if you want to hear me talk more in depth about it and like how I think it could fully work and what limitations would need to be made for it and that kind of stuff, let me know in the comments below if you want to see that video. But outside of that, I think there is a good amount of stuff that you could do for the Reaper's Bones, but it just has to be careful not to cross that line where it becomes a PvE focused thing when really the Reaper's Bones is meant to be the PvP focused faction. Next, I would like to see a rework of the raid voyages for the Reaper's Bones. So not actually changing the core system, but more so how these raid voyages work when used in the context of the Reaper's Bones. So every time we see these updates for all the different factions, whether it was with Season 11 or just recently with the Hunter's Call in Season 15, all of these have gotten raid voyages. So it wouldn't surprise me if we got raid voyages for the Reaper's Bones, but what I would like them to do is go a little bit further with it and make the experience of doing a raid voyage for the Reaper's Bones different than all the other factions in the game. While the raid voyages are PvE activities and could potentially conflict with what I just said previously about keeping the Reaper's Bones PvP focused, I think this is not an issue with the raid voyages, since at its core, they're world events designed for players to meet and fight over. So it's not like we're taking like a Gold Hoarder voyage and then applying it to Reaper's Bones. These are world events in the form of a voyage, so they're already kind of designed for players to like interact from these events. So I think it works pretty well. I don't think there is really an issue with the raid voyages being for the Reaper's Bones. But what I would like to see is Reaper versions of each of these raid voyages. For example, with the Sea Forts, changing the enemy to be the Guardians of Fortune or something similar to that, and then making the lore of this voyage be us reclaiming the Sea Fort for Flameheart. I think you could do that for a lot of them, because part of the problem with raid voyages for the Reaper's Bones is that it basically, in the lore context, be Reapers attacking themselves. Because, like, the Sea Forts are controlled by Flameheart, the Skeleton Forts are obviously allied or controlled by the Reaper's Bones and Flameheart, and basically everything except for the Sunken Kingdom is all tied to Flameheart. So you have to kind of change the lore of these raid voyages and these world events for the Reaper's Bones for it to make sense in that context. And I think with that, you can add some additions that would make it a little bit more interesting. So like I said, with the Sea Fort, you'd be fighting the Guardians of Fortune. You could have new enemies there instead of the current phantoms that we have there now. I think this would be easy to do in the sense that it would be small additions or tweaks to the current content, but I also think it would make these activities feel fresh again with a new spin on them. The next thing I want to see is a seasonal story with world changes in the game. This is something that Rare did during the adventures and a little bit in the early days of Sea of Thieves, but has kind of strayed away from later on with the game. For a Reaper season though, I would love to see this be the time that the Reaper's Bones goes on their full assault against the Sea of Thieves world. Throughout the course of the season, I would like to see us have in-game events that would be like battlegrounds for this war. So to give you an idea of what kind of events I'm thinking of, it would be stuff like the Reapers versus the World event that we had in the past, as well as the Lost Sands adventure that we had. So those kind of things where it's us choosing a side kind of and trying to help either the Reaper's Bones or help the, other factions of the game fight against the Reaper's Bones. And while I don't think these battles should have result in the same changes that we saw with Golden Sands back with that Lost Sands adventure, but I do want to see stuff like damage to buildings or just visible changes that a battle has taken place. And you could even make it so that depending on who we aid more throughout the season, if you kind of think of like season 16 being like a war that's happening within the Sea of Thieves, whoever ends up winning this war will kind of determine like what content we get going forward. So maybe if the opposition wins, not the Reapers, then you might see stuff like an Athena's Fortune update, for like season 18 or 19, because it wouldn't be obviously the next season because that would be planned before all this happened. But maybe a year from now, it'd be like an Athena's Fortune or, like a Outpost update or something like that. I think there's a lot of story potential as well as just kind of events and world changes that could really be engaging and really do what Sea of Thieves does best, which we haven't really seen them do in a while. So I think this would be a great opportunity to kind of get back to that storytelling through world changes and events and that kind of stuff. So next up, this one is probably the most critical I'm going to be in this video, and that's I do not want to see any PvP world event voyages for this Reaper update. So that might sound a little bit weird, so let me try to explain. I'm not talking about stuff like the Floor of the Dam, which is a great addition in the game, and I would be fine with them adding something similar to the Floor of the Dam if they could get it on par with that level, but that's not really what I'm referring to. What I'm actually talking about is stuff like the Skull of Siren Song and the Burning Blade world events that we've gotten over the past few years, which were designed at its core to be heavily reliant on PvP to make the activity interesting. The problem with this is after the first couple weeks, no one cares to compete for it anymore. If they see someone else doing it, they won't even try to do it, or most people just don't even want to look and see if anyone's doing it in the first place and don't really care to do it at all. I was one of the few people that called that out before the Skull of Siren Song even released, and I said that this was going to be a problem with this voyage. And a lot of people were just like, no, it's great, it's going to be amazing, look how awesome this is, oh, Sea of Thieves is back, baby, this is, the best update we've ever gotten. And then 2 weeks later, no one cared about the Skull Siren Song, and I was like, yeah, I was right, and this was a bit of a waste of time in terms of development time that could have gone into something else. I'm happy that they tried it. I think it is a good try, and I don't even think the Voyage is bad. And same with the Burning Blade, I think they both have good elements to them, but you just can't guarantee player engagement, especially long term. So the core activity needs to be fun, even if they aren't being contested for it. And the problem with both of these world events, but especially the Skull Siren Song, is that they just weren't that fun to do without the player interaction component of it. At this point, I don't want to see them try this type of activity again. I want to see something that's just genuinely new in the game, that is also fun to do, as well as being highly valuable. If you have that combination, it will naturally create PvP interaction. But with that aside, this video really isn't trying to critique anything that Rare has done. This is more just kind of my hopes and what I would love to see in a Reapers update. So, I just kind of want to get that out of the way. I have a feeling that might be the direction that they'll go with a Reaper update, and they're going to try something like the Skull Siren Song again, and I just don't want to see that. That would kind of, I wouldn't say I'd be upset, but I would kind of write off the season if I saw that was kind of the main piece of content. Next up though, this is another thing that I did talk about in the past. I know a lot of this is just ideas that I've had in the past that are all coming together, but when we're talking about a Reaper update, it makes sense to kind of pool all the different Reaper ideas over the years. So this idea is related to Reaper merchants. So this would be in some ways an evolution on the Villager at Black Market, but in my opinion, a lot more interesting. The thing that I think hurt the black market was that it was always available and it really wasn't much different than just going to the regular outpost shops, which I think is why Rare eventually just put the inventory from the black market into the regular outpost shops, because it just didn't really make sense and it was confusing to new players. Reaper merchants would be different. First, they would have a suite of cosmetics that are exclusive to the Reaper's merchants, so you wouldn't be able to get them anywhere else, even at the Reaper's Bones tent. I think the in-game lore explanation for these cosmetics could be something like the Reapers have stolen these cosmetics from cargo ships and are now trying to profit from them. It's a pretty simple lore explanation, but I don't really think you need much more than that. Just The reason why they're selling cosmetics now is because they stole them. I mean, it's straightforward, but I think it works. So these cosmetics would be exclusive to these merchants, and to keep it interesting, these merchants would appear randomly on islands for a short time. So to get these cosmetics, it'd be through chance encounters. They could do it two ways. They could just do it randomly throughout the game, and it's just random on every server, or they could potentially do it where it's the same merchant at a certain place on all servers, which could kind of give this kind of a little bit like cult following. So, for example, it could be like for 30 minutes right now, it is at Marauder's Arch, and people are posting about it on Twitter, so everyone's trying to rush and sail over to that area so that they can go talk to the Reaper merchant. That could be pretty interesting. I could see that being kind of a fun thing for them to do. But if it was just random encounters and it was random for every server, I think that would work as well. So when you go and talk to these Reaper merchants, they'll only have a handful of items available for you to buy. Similar to the Sea Post, if you've ever gone to the Sea Post, you can actually buy cosmetics from the merchant there, and they only have a couple cosmetics available for you to buy. So this would be similar to that. You wouldn't have the full catalog of all the Reaper merchant cosmetics, it would just be whatever they have available on them. And I think the cool thing with that is it makes it worth talking to them every time you see them, so then every time you have a chance to see different types of cosmetics. I think this would be a great way to make exploring the world more fun, because you just kind of stumble upon them and it's a cool little addition to the world. I also think it adds some new cosmetics that could be a little bit more exclusive but not tied to just a ton of grinding, which is usually how a lot of the new in-game cosmetics are able to be unlocked. You basically have to grind a ton for that season doing commendation stuff, or you can go the opposite route where you just buy stuff from the Pirate Emporium. And this would be kind of an alternative of having something that's a little bit more exclusive, but it's more of a chance encounter. I also think this could be a great way to bring back doubloons, which the doubloons were kind of meant just for the black market, and you could potentially make it so the Reaper merchants only accept doubloons, which could kind of bring back the reason to have doubloons in the first place. Because I don't know about y'all, but I almost never use doubloons except for to buy the monthly levels. Other than that, I don't think I ever use them. But moving on, the next idea that I had for Reaper's update is a Reaper Scout Parrot. So if you've seen in the game through like the different cinematics and stuff, there's the parrot that the Servant of Flame uses, and it kind of allows him to see what is going on in the rest of the Sea of Thieves world. So he'll send the parrot to go and spy on different islands and stuff. You see him a lot in the different trailers. It's kind of like the little crab that we see in the trailers, but for the Reaper's Bones. It's kind of like almost like their animal mascot, in my opinion. But what I would love to see is to turn that Reaper Scout Parrot into an actual in-game item that can be used, and you can actually use it to do something similar to what the Servant of Flame is doing. So we've seen the Reaper Scout Parrot in the game for a while now as a pet cosmetic, but this would now make it an item that you could use. And I think this would work similar to how the Falcon Scout Parrot that was added in Fortnite several years ago worked, but obviously it would be different for Sea of Thieves. But if you want kind of like an idea of how you'd actually play with it and kind of do stuff with it, and like how you'd fly around and that kind of stuff, I think that is a good example of how it could work. So I could see two ways of you accessing this. The first method is just acquiring it in game, like how we have like the trident or the throwing spears, where you could just find it, or maybe you could purchase it at like the Reaper's Island or something like that, and it could have like a durability limit, so you could only use it for a short amount of time. That's one way to do it, but I think the way that I would prefer is to have it be a permanent weapon slot, similar to how we have the grapple gun or the blunderbuss and that kind of stuff currently. I prefer this option just because I think it's a little bit more useful, and having it always accessible, I think will guarantee that players actually use it. Whereas when it's stuff that's just temporary, where you have to find and pick it up and you have to be holding and everything, I just don't think players use that as often. So now that we've gone over that, what exactly would this Scout Parrot even do? First, I think you'd be able to use it so you could fly around with it, and you can control it kind of like a drone in a limited range of where you're standing. This would allow you to search islands or ships without actually being there in person. So for example, maybe you could fly around and look at a ship and to see if anyone's on board before telling your crewmates to sneak on. That would be a really good use for it, I think. And then obviously the Scout Parrot would be visible to the enemy players, and if they can aim well at it, they can shoot it down. I think we could also make it so that the scout could also pick up small items or small treasures, such as messages in bottles or trinkets, and they could fly them back to you. Which would be really nice because I think we've all had times where we've been like sailing past an island and we see like a message in the bottle, we see like a little treasure, and we wish we could grab it, but there's no point of like anchoring and picking it up and then getting back on. And this could be an alternative that if you do it quick enough, you could fly your parrot out to grab it and have it fly back to your ship. While this might not be a major new PvP item on par with something like the Scattershot added last year, I do think it would fit really well with the Reaper theme season given how heavily linked the Scout Parrots are to the Reaper's Bones. Finally though, while I think a Reaper themed season is great, I would love to see at the end of the season something that teases or leads into Athena's Fortune / Guardians of Fortune update. We've had updates aimed for the Reaper's Bones in the past, like last year's season 13, which had like the Burning Blade and skeleton camps and everything, but we really haven't seen anything new for Athena's Fortune since Hourglass was introduced with season 8, and then before that, the Legend of the Veil Voyage added in season 6. Since then, there really hasn't been anything new with Athena's Fortune and being a pirate legend. I would really like to see, as a result of the Reaper season, having like a response from the rival faction Athena's Fortune. So maybe this would be a good subject to cover in a future video of what I'd like to see in a Pirate Legend season. So if you're interested in that, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and also let me know in the comments below what would you like to see in a Reaper's Bone season or Athena's Fortune season. But that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye y'all.